Well, thank you, Brian, for inviting me. Thank you for participating in our Discern the Call event that we had last month. And I really appreciate being able to be here with you today. I in no way think that I'm an expert on this subject. It became a burden to me a couple of years ago when I was watching the Mississippi Baptist Convention online, and they had the panel up there and they were talking about this issue, and that's when it really kind of pricked my conscience and my heart and made me interested to know a little bit more. Went back to our association, Pearl River Baptist Association, and began, our guys, we get together for coffee once a week, and so during that conversation one day I said, you know, I saw this statistic and I was like, we need to pray about that. And we put together a prayer emphasis on October the 2nd of that year, which Luke 10:22 says, "Pray you the Lord of the harvest that He send out workers into His harvest field." So we had a prayer emphasis. Out of that came our Discern the Call event, where we said, well, we want to address this however we can. So we came up, felt like the Lord led us to do a conference, which we had last month. We had about 60 people attend the conference. Now, half of those were prospective or aspiring pastors. So we felt like we were able to pour into them and encourage them and walk with them through some of their questions and issues. And it was really an associational emphasis. We had people come from the whole region to help us. And we'll share a little bit of some of the stuff that came out of that. But this is it might be a little bit jumbled, to be honest with you. I'm still in the middle of working through all of this stuff. Still in the middle of praying through it, thinking through it, assessing it. You know, I like to think I'm a researcher, so I've gone back and tried to find some real good statistics on it. And so that's where I want to start this morning as we address the pastoral crisis. Here's the reported crisis, all right? And maybe you've heard this or something like it. Around 25% of SBC churches in Mississippi have no pastor and little hope of getting a pastor. That was kind of the statistic that I heard 2 years ago. How many of you have heard that? Yeah. All right. So I heard it. I'm not going to say who I heard it from, but I heard it, well, this past week, I decided I need to dig a little bit into that. I wonder where we're at now. So I sent an email out to John Pace. He's the Director of Leadership Department at the Convention Board here in our state. And then I looked up another guy, his parallel over in Alabama, just to see where they're at. And this is the information that I got. The reality is that at any given time, 15 to 20% of SBC churches in Mississippi are without a pastor. Ken Allen over in Alabama said it's 17% right now in Alabama. Now, that's not 25%, okay? That's significantly lower than 25%. So I guess the grapevine kind of expanded it a little bit. However, it's still high. The percentage is up from a normal 10% at any given time. Now, I don't mind this being a discussion. If you have questions, I'll be glad to take those. So the question has become, and we've seen this in other places. I remember seeing something about North Carolina Baptist, 500 churches in North Carolina without a pastor at that time. So why are fewer men going into ministry? I know from my own experience being a seminary professor, our applications are down. I know that's the case at New Orleans Seminary, which is my alma mater. I went there. I got 3 degrees from NOBTS. I know that from William Carey, which is also my alma mater. From Brett Golson, he said our applications are down for ministry students, right? Ministry students, applications down. And this is specifically has to do with pastors. Some of the same ones who talk about the lower number of applicants also say, and not only is it lower applicants, but a higher percentage of them are women. Well, for Southern Baptists, that creates a little bit of an issue, doesn't it? because we don't call women to be in the pulpit, right? To be senior pastors. So the issue is before us. Why are fewer men going into the ministry? That's kind of the question that's kind of hanging out there. What's the issue? What's the deal? What's the real problem? What is the real problem? And John Pace told me this. He said, we have a lot of resumes from those who are seeking full-time positions, but now that sounds like, oh, well, we have an abundance of pastors, right? But 90% of the churches that need a pastor are small churches. And we're saying under 100, under 75, depending on if I'm talking to Ken Allen or John Pace, they both told me basically the same thing. Well, these are bivocational pastorates. People are not looking for that. Here are some factors related to the question, why are fewer men going into ministry? Ken Allen from Alabama State Board of Missions, he said, most men respond to a call to ministry in their high school or college years. Ding, ding. Right over here in the plaid jacket, right over here, right. My own son has responded to the call to ministry. When he was in high school, he's now at Cary at college. Yet, the smallest age segment in our churches is under 30. In other words, we have more people over 30, over the categories of over 30 than we do younger. I mean, you can see that's a factor. That's a major factor, right? Smaller pool to draw from. Young ministers typically seek second chair positions rather than a senior position. So they're the ones who do feel called to ministry, they might not be ready to be the man in the first chair, right? In the pulpit every Sunday leading the church. They might not be ready for that. Or they may be hesitant or reluctant to do that, which I confess that I was when I was younger. I was reluctant to do that. So these are just factors. The third bullet point, young ministers are more reluctant than past generations to make the transition to senior pastoral ministry from other staff positions. It used to be that somebody who felt called to ministry, a man who felt called to ministry would go into youth ministry, right? He would preach to his youth congregation. He would develop the skills and abilities, and then naturally it would move on to a senior position at some point when he outgrew the youth ministry kind of idea. How many of you who are senior pastors started out as youth minister? I made it for 10 months in youth ministry. I'm proud of that. I survived 10 months as a youth minister. You know, I did it. So check off the list. But now and I'm kind of addressing some of these things just because I'm not going to get into some of the weeds here. But I think specializations, you know, our seminaries, for good or ill, just the truth is, they're promoting specializations. It's not, are you called to preach, but it's, are you called to youth ministry, student ministry, college ministry? Are you called to children's ministry? Are you called to church planting? Are you called to church revitalization? And there's all these specializations. And I think that young ministers are looking at that and they're like, well, I like this, so I'm going to go in that direction. And not really looking at the senior pastor position as the position that they're called to. And we can talk about that later on. MDiv students have dramatically decreased. That's another trend in seminary education, is the MDiv is kind of going the way of the dodo, right? We have MAs now that are specialized. You can go for a DMin without getting an MDiv. That used to not be the case. You can get an MA degree and go into the DMin program. I fought that a little bit. You can get an MA and go into a PhD program as well. And so students are looking less at the MDiv. Why the MDiv? Why did our forebears design the MDiv? Because it's a professional degree that hits 3 at least 3 areas that a pastor needs to be prepared to go into, especially if he's going to be a senior staff pastor of a small church. He's got to be the expert in everything. He's got to be able to preach. He's got to know his doctrine, be theologically sound, and he's got to be able to work with people, counseling and ministry type administration and all that kind of stuff. So that's why the MDiv is a 3-year degree. That's why it takes so long. Because he's getting all those specializations and getting equipped in all those areas. Well, the MDiv is not really something that students are looking for now. They're looking for something quick that the churches will accept and say, oh yeah, he's seminary trained. Well, MA will do that. And I'm not putting down the MA. I'm not putting down any of those programs. I'm just saying these are trends that we're seeing that I think are factors related to the issue that we're facing. And then overwhelmingly, this is Ken again, overwhelmingly our churches are small, they're bivocational. That's a huge, huge factor. Yes, sir.
Just to add, because one of the things I've always thought is this was coming anyway, because I was sitting in a Union University conference 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
They said we're hitting a huge drop in the amount of people that were having children in the first place.
That's right.
And we were hitting that. And then you look at colleges are now 60-40 men and women, or
that's right.
Men.
Even the
so
seminaries.
I wonder if this was coming, even if we kept all the other things good anyway.
Yes.
But yeah.
I think that, I'm going to let that hang in the air, if you don't mind, that pregnant question hang in the air, because we're going to talk about, I think, what might address that and take our conversation a little further in a little bit. Ken Allen said this, quote, "We need men who are willing to see the need to help the smaller church." Right? If we have all these resumes for a full-time position, does that mean that there are other churches looking to change? And I didn't ask this, maybe we'll have to drill down. Or are they without a church, but not willing to go to a part-time church or bivocational church? I like Mark Clifton. Some of you are probably familiar with Mark Clifton, and he does the replant with NAM. He talks about normative sized churches, right? These are normative sized churches. We've got to get out of our heads and out of our minds that all the churches are going to be, running 200, 300, 400 and more and have multiple staff. Look, the pastor's life can be very lonely, especially in a small church where he has a part-time youth guy who only shows up on Wednesday night and Sunday because he has a job, or he goes to school, or the church doesn't pay him but part-time, and maybe they have, maybe they don't have a ministry assistant. Who knows? But it can be hard. It can be hard, and there has to be that willingness. John Pace threw out some of these statistics and factors. 52% of pastorates in Mississippi are now bivocational pastorates. 52%. That means that over 70% of associate minister roles, that'd be worship pastor, student pastor, children's minister, these are part-time. It's over 70%. 80% of Mississippi Baptist churches, convention churches, average 100 or less in attendance. And then John suggested this. He said, churches, pastors, and ministers have lost focus on the importance of the local church, pastors, and ministers in helping to identify, counsel, mentor, and assist those who are wrestling with a call to ministry. We've kind of lost that vision, the importance of being that role. I had a conversation, let me throw this out. John Pace said, when's the last time you heard the call to ministry included in an invitation? So we'll come back to that in just a little bit. Had a conversation with Greg Wilton this past week on campus at NOBTS Level College. He's the dean, Level College. He told us that students come from the churches to the college and seminary woefully unprepared for ministry positions. In other words, they're coming without any experience. They're coming without having done much work. Some of them, if they're coming from big churches, some of them have not really been in the adult worship service. They've been in separated worship services, so they don't really know how it goes in the big church, right? In the big church meeting. So they come woefully unprepared for ministry positions. Many of them love the Lord and they want to do ministry, but they're just not ready and simply cannot be recommended with confidence. So they're getting them and they're having to really work on not just training them for ministry, but discipling them and getting them ready to do that. So a seminary can and should partner with churches, Greg said, in preparing the next generation of ministers, but it's the local churches who must accept the primary responsibility of creating the pipeline for calling out the called and for training them through internships and mentoring. Internships and mentoring. I think this is a key strategy for addressing the pastoral crisis. Ben Skipper at our Discern the Call conference gave us 10 ways you can set an atmosphere in your church for calling out the called. 10 ways to do that. We'll just run through those. He said, preach about the call to ministry. So talk about it, have that in your sermons. Preach on those passages where men were called to preach, where men were selected for the mission. Secondly, plan for when someone responds. Be ready. Be prepared. Hey, we don't know who might walk that aisle at any time and say, I feel like God's calling me to ministry. I feel like God's calling me to the mission field. I feel like God's calling me to preach. Be ready. Plan for when someone responds. Here's a book that I would recommend. We gave these out to the mentor track at our Discern the Call event, Calling Out the Called. It's just a way for you, it's just kind of a plan for you to use if you do have someone in your church who says, hey, I feel called to ministry. So you can walk with them through that. So plan. Third, tell your story. Tell your story. I think it's really important for us to share. And it might be uncomfortable for you to share that. I know it is kind of for me to share about when the Lord was dealing with me, because I was reluctant. I resisted the call. I didn't talk to anybody about it for 6 months. I dealt with it. I did not want to go into ministry. I told God, Lord, I will be a deacon. I will be a Sunday school teacher. And if you will let me have my own business and do what I dream about doing, I will give lots of money to the church. But I don't want to preach. I don't want to preach. But telling your story connects with those who are in your congregation who may be going through this and really don't have anybody to talk to. I didn't have anybody. I don't come from a long line of ministers. I didn't really have anybody. I had a pastor in my family who lived the next state over, and I rarely saw. And whenever we did see him, I was like, okay, he's different. Right? He's different. He was different. Dion knows who I'm talking about. So, but tell your story so that people feel comfortable connecting with you about that. And your story is unique. We all have different fingerprints. And I think God deals with us uniquely with where we are at that time in our lives. And your story is unique. And it is a good story because it has God in it and doing something in your life. Open your home. Open your home. When you see someone in your church who may be dealing with the call to ministry, get them in your life. Have fellowship with them. Bring them in if you can in any way. Invite guys to tag along with you. Ben Skipper said, hey, if you're going to the hospital, Take a young man with you that you feel like God's dealing with. Take him, if you're going on an evangelistic visit, bring them. Create opportunities for them to lead. Give them a chance to try it out. It doesn't, look, if they ultimately say, I'm not called to ministry, it's okay. If, hey, average church members can preach too. Right? They can share the word too. They can teach. That doesn't mean that they're going in ministry. It means they're considering it. And that's okay. It's okay for somebody to say no also, as long as they've looked into it, as long as they've honestly looked into that. Number 7, have more I see in you conversations. What that means is, you know, LaRue, I see in you a real aptitude for the languages, you know. I see in you just a heart for reaching young people. I see in you pastoral concern for people around you, people in your life. Just, you know, encourage them. Have more I see in you conversations. Expect God to call out the called. He was like, I know this is weird, but I think we need to expect God to do that. Look, anticipate that. Have faith that He'll do that. And He said, pray for it and pay for it. I already mentioned Luke 10:2, pray the Lord of the harvest. But pray for it, pay for it. Pay for it would be, you know, hey, invest. Invest your time, your money, your resources, your attention into this because it's important for the next generation. So that's Ben Skipper setting an atmosphere. Any questions before we move on?
Yeah, I got one. Go back to the other slide. The last thing that you said.
Which one?
That one right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Training through internships and mentoring.
Yeah.
Okay. How does a church, a small church, when 80% of our churches,
Yeah.
a small church, how do they provide, and they're largely senior adults,
Yep.
how do they provide an internship and mentoring?
Yep. Well, internships can be broad. I mean, that's a broad category. You can be unpaid intern. You can be a well-paid intern. You can be a stipend. It can be a scholarship. It can be whatever. But it's just a way of recognizing that this young man or young woman, if they're going to, you know, ministry, it feels like the Lord is leading them to vocational ministry. And we want to acknowledge that. And we want to bring them under our wing, recognized by the church, and say, hey, you're going to help us out, and we're going to help you out. So, but I think that your question is on point, and that is, you're in a small church, which all of my pastoring has been in a tiny church, okay? I tried to get an intern, and we were going to pay them great, give them a house to live in and everything. No interest. And I don't know, I think maybe it was because of the church that I was in. They didn't have any interest in coming to that church. Does that make sense? They might have wanted to work under me, but I'm not really drawn to that, you know. And I think that that's kind of what the statistic of the resumes for full-time, but they're not interested in part-time. So I don't know how to address that, but that's an issue. I think another thing to address that would be, Dion, is some of our larger churches could run some awesome internship programs and be feeders for the smaller churches. Be feeders for sending out.
And in the larger churches, the pastors would have to say, look, there is a legitimate need for part-time,
yes,
bivocational ministers.
Yeah.
It's not all First Baptist churches are.
Right. I think they have to have a bigger vision than just their church.
Just their church.
Yeah.
Adam Bennett has said he's just with some of his lay guys, that just his regular members, is trying to say, hey, let me teach you how to prepare a sermon.
Yeah.
So that, and then give you opportunity to do that with the idea, can he from his church send out to our smaller churches that are needing someone to come preach?
Supply preacher, yeah.
To provide that supply, because again, everybody here knows sometimes it's difficult to find who's going to fill this pulpit when I'm out.
Yeah.
And you know, and the thing is, we haven't raised them up from within. And Adam's saying, well, why can't we raise them up from within? Why can't I have a training program in my own church to do that, to then be available to other churches?
Absolutely, we have to do that. That's what Greg Wilton was saying. You know, the church has to adopt that mindset of we have to replace ourselves. The staff, we have to replace ourselves. We have to have a contingency plan for when we're gone and for the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. All right. So here's where I'm at. All right, so I gave you all the stats. I gave you kind of the stuff, and without any kind of, I really hesitate to say this. I don't want it to look like they're wrong, and I'm definitely not saying any of that is wrong. I just shared it with you. But it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and you say, I'm having these symptoms, and the doctor writes you a script for those symptoms. I've become convinced in these 2 years that I've tried to deal with this stuff that the lack of pastors is a symptom of a greater problem. It's a greater problem. Let me ask you this question. How do you think most church members would fill in that blank?
Love.
Love.
God. God holy.
God is love.
Yeah.
Is love God's primary characteristic?
No.
How would, and I'm gonna lean on you here, LaRue. How would a first century Jewish person fill in that blank?
He's holy.
Yeah.
God is holy.
Well, that's where I'm going, and I think that's the main thing. But can you read this Hebrew? Shema Yisrael?
Hear, O Israel.
No, read it in Hebrew.
Oh.
I want to hear it in Hebrew.
Shema. Israel. Yahweh. Elohim. Actually, that would be
Eloheinu, right?
Yahweh.
Ahad. Echad. Is that right? So now translate it. Sorry I put you on the spot. I just wanted you to say it because I didn't think I could do it as well as you.
Yeah. Shema is we translate it to hear.
Yeah.
Hear, O Israel.
Yeah.
Context is everything.
Yeah.
Shema, depending on context, and this particular context is not just to hear, it's to heed.
Yes.
It's one thing to hear something.
That's right.
It's altogether something different to heed. And so, hear, O Israel, heed, take heed, O Israel. It's not an infinitive, but take heed, O Israel, the Lord. And that is in the emphatic. Yahweh, Elohim, the Lord your God is one.
Now, you're the Hebrew scholar, so Echad can mean one, but it has a different nuance to it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It not only is it one, but in this particular context, it is the only.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only one.
He's alone. He's set apart.
Other.
He is other. He is other.
Therein,
He is holy. Right.
it means to be separated.
Right. Right.
Totally separated and apart from all of it.
Right. Now, here's why I bring this up. I want to read this email I got last week from a student at the River, PRCC. I teach New Testament there. And she put something in a discussion board that I was like, what is she talking about? So I emailed her and I said, hey, I commented on her post. I said, hey, I'm really interested, intrigued by your comments. And I said, I would like to know more about where you're coming from. And she said, I was raised in a strict Christian home. We went to church 2 days a week, Wednesdays and twice on Sundays. We never missed a church function. I was in every play put on by the church, sang in the church choir. Every Friday, my stepmom would do what she called a kids' Bible study, where she would take out this huge children's book and did stories. Let me skip ahead here. And then she said, what I remember from hearing our pastor preach, and I don't know what church she was in. I don't even know if it was a Baptist church. What I remember from hearing our pastor preach and from doing the kid Bible study was nothing like what I'm reading now. I'm making them read through the New Testament. For example, she says, a section in Acts, I believe, it was talked about Christians having to sell everything they owned and give all the money to the apostles, which is not true. But then, when this one guy didn't, he sold most of it, but kept something for himself. He was instantly killed by God. Ananias, right? Then when his wife did what she was expected of her, per God's commandment, wife to obey her husband, she too was killed. My God asks us to all help one another and to do all we can. He doesn't expect us to put unnecessary hardship to line the pockets of others, no matter what the cause. He is a giving God, not a taking one. If that woman had spoken against her husband, what would have happened to her? She probably would have been killed. Even so, she was set up for failure from the jump. Damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. What I mean when I say my outlook is tainted is simple. Here it is. If the God they speak of does things like this, then I want no part of it. My God is forgiving, merciful, and loving. He would never have done things like this. One of the greatest gifts God gave to us was free will, and that situation goes against our free will. It took that man's choice from him and his wife. The consequences for those actions did not fit the crime. I know I don't consider myself a Christian anymore, but I still have the same God, and I always have. I just follow the spiritual side of the universe a little closer.
And what was your response?
That's personal.
I said, I honestly don't know how to respond to your email. The professor in me wants to help you walk through those passages and show you some good answers to your reasonable concerns. But being also a pastor, I would like to talk to you about your view of God.
Yeah. Because she has an incomplete view of God.
Yes.
She takes the parts that she likes and she's throwing out the other part where God is just, and but then you got God is merciful, God is grace,
He's holy.
He's holy.
He's
different.
I would say that his number one characteristic and the number one thing we need to communicate as preachers of the Word of God is God is holy. I think that's his love flows out of that holiness because he's other.
But to understand the holiness of God also introduces us to the judgment of God.
Oh.
That is redemptive. It is not punitive.
Yeah.
Yes. It is redemptive. And even with holy war in the Old Testament, that's a big issue.
Sure.
Even today, what's going on in our world. But with holy war, when you look at the people groups, the 6 groups that are identified to be eliminated,
Mm-hmm.
their sin had matured to the point of child sacrifice. Okay? And the judgment of God began early in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 16. And at that point, God told Abram, that regarding the Amorites, that their sin had not matured.
Yeah.
And he held his judgment, demonstrating what Paul communicates in Romans, that long suffering of God leads us to repentance.
That's right.
It should. But it was a demonstration of the calcification, the hardening of
Right.
the heart that led to the worship of the other gods. God, the Hebrew God is uniquely one,
Yes.
separated completely from the others. The other deities, the act of worship violated the value of human life.
Mm-hmm.
And it led to not only the abuse of women and the death of children, it was the worship of Molech where they actually sacrificed their child to the sun god. And it was those individuals that God wanted to eliminate like a cancer.
Right.
It was
Exactly.
a surgical procedure, but it was justice, the justice of God. But it was redemptive in nature to preserve the crown of His creation.
Yep. Yep.
Mankind, not
I
just
think-
His people, but the whole.
I think we need to give those kinds of answers to this. But I fear that she represents a lot of church members.
That's where
Yeah.
the boy that I brought up, this is.
How could a loving God do something like that or put up with something? Well, those are kind of secondary issues. Once we get a vision of who God is, then I think all that will kind of fall in place. So I would take us to Isaiah 6. Isaiah 6. The year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 covered his face, with 2 covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. There's no other attribute of God that is triply emphasized like that. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. Verse 5, and I said, Woe is me. I'm lost, I'm undone, I'm disintegrating, is kind of the idea. For I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. What comes next? And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. Now, R.C. Sproul in his book, The Holiness of God, says there's a pattern here. This is what I really want to get across today. There's a pattern here. A pattern repeated in history. God appears. People quake in terror. God forgives and heals. God sins. We're on the symptom side of a long process. From brokenness to mission is the human pattern. Okay? So if we have a problem with the sending, something's broken in the chain leading up to that. That's what I would argue. Think about biblical examples of people who went from not being on mission to being on mission. Moses. Take your sandals off, Moses. You're on holy ground. He had an encounter with God. I'm sending you, right? Who else? Paul, on the road to Damascus. Who are you, Lord? I'm Jesus whom you're persecuting. Now get up and you go. Right? I mean, over and over again, we see it here with Isaiah. We know Jeremiah was reluctant, but he couldn't get away from the call of God. He couldn't get away from the presence and the holy power of God. Hosea. I mean, over and over, this is the pattern. That's what Sproul is saying. This is the pattern. God shows up. His presence is there. Something happens with the sinner who is transformed, and then they're sent on mission. Then they're sent on mission. Isaiah's holy experience translated into a holy mission. Holiness is the fuel that ignites passion and power for ministry. We don't like that, do we? Thank you, Grayson, for agreeing with me. We don't like that. We don't hear it much. I used to hear it growing up. Did you? Did you ever hear that growing up? Something along those lines? That you got to get the sin out of your life if you want to be effective for the Lord's work?
Yeah.
Do you hear that much now? I don't. I'll be honest with you. I remember going to a breakout session designed for those who are interested in ministry, and one of our panelists said, yep, when the Lord called me, the first thing that had to go was my music. I had to throw away all my CDs of Kid Rock and whoever else, and there were some young people sitting on the front row, and they just kind of looked at each other and were like, why? Why? We don't like that, do we? But I'm going to tell you something. When I read Acts, and I teach through Acts at Luther Rice, this is one of my favorite verses, favorite passages. It kind of sums up what had happened. And here's the thing. So Peter and John are preaching. The Sanhedrin calls them in, say, quit preaching in this name of Jesus, quit teaching in this name. And they say, well, you consider, is it right for us to obey men or obey God? We're going to obey God. And they sent them out. They went back to the church. And this is what gets me. They went back to the church. They told them what happened. And the church prayed. And if you will study that prayer, oh my gosh, it looks nothing like how we pray.
Yeah.
And they didn't say, oh, Lord, would you just change their hearts? Would you put a hedge of protection around Peter and John? Maybe we need to move somewhere else. Just help us to kind of, keep us safe. That is not their request. They come to the despot. They call God a despot in Greek. That's the word. And they acknowledge His sovereignty, and they acknowledge His holy servant Jesus, and they acknowledge His holy word, and when they finally get to their request, they say, give us boldness. They say this, and now, Lord, look upon their threats and grant to your servants to continue to speak your word with all boldness. What? That's a holy church, because it's not till Acts chapter 5 that the problems start coming in. That's when Annas and Sapphira start. But prior to that, you see a holy, on fire, God protected, God birthed, God filled, Spirit baptized believers who are on mission at the beginning of the church. This is the purest state the church has ever been in, and they're praying for courage and boldness because the mission is threatened.
I'm curious about your thought. My perspective is that their boldness and their open declaration, proclamation, and the uniqueness, the set apart of their life, I think it had such an impact that we see.
Yes.
I think their life experience and testimony, witness, had an impact on Saul, who, after his conversion, in Galatians, he asked the question, should I listen to man or should I?
Maybe. It's the same Holy Spirit pattern.
Same Spirit pattern. Mm-hmm. It's the impact that the believers there.
Well, I'm going to do you up another one, LaRue. Yeah. Look at this. Look at this verse.
Yeah.
At the end of Ephesians, after Paul has talked about the holy church of God, the holy life we're to live, and he gets to fighting the spiritual battles, he says, now, it's almost like a crescendo, arm up so that you can do what? So you can pray. and so that you can proclaim. And right after that he says, and pray for me too, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly, same word in Acts 4, parousia, to proclaim the mystery of the gospel for which I'm an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly as I ought to speak. 2 times he asked them, I need boldness. I need boldness. I need boldness. And I'm going to tell you, gentlemen, boldness only comes from holy living. You know that. Boldness comes from being in the presence of God. That's where it comes from. And I fear that we've tainted our mission by letting a vulgar world impact us.
Well, consider.
I don't know why that happened.
When he's writing to the Ephesians, the deities that are being worshipped.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing.
While you're pulling that back up, I think, even our own church members, it's why church discipline is difficult. Pastors are saying,
It is.
we need to do church discipline.
It is.
We got church members saying, well, I can't say anything to Grayson because he could say some things about how I'm living.
Yep.
And so it's a fear of holiness because I'm not living holy in one area of
Yep.
my life, and you're not living holy in one area of your life, and we don't really want to talk about
Right.
the lack of holiness. And so I don't want to touch his unholy living. So I'm not going to be bold because I'm afraid you might call out my unholy living.
Yep.
The Bible does say, judge not that you be not judged.
My favorite verse now, right? That's the favorite verse of everybody.
Well, I mean, I have some fear and trepidation talking to you guys about being holy. I'm not holy. I fear talking about this. When this is the fact, Brian will attest to it. Brian said, I want you to come talk about handling the holy to our GCBA. And I was like, let's change that. I don't want to be the guy coming to talk about holiness. I'll talk about addressing the pastoral crisis and we'll bring that in, but I'm not going to be, I'm not holy. But it's holy boldness that's essential for making sinners into saints. Let's just be honest. And then the problem of handling the holy, R.C. Sproul, I think, captured it best in this paragraph. We tend to have mixed feelings about the holy. There's a sense in which we are at the same time attracted to it and yet repulsed by it. Part of us yearns for the holy while part of us despises it. We can't live in the middle. God's not going to change. He's not going to lower His standards. He's not going to become any less holy than He always has been. We're the vacillating ones. We're the ones who are waffling on this. And we need to sell out and be separate. Holiness is not just being pure. The Pharisees tried that one. Holiness is being separated unto God, belonging to God. And we have to do that if we're going to handle the holy. What is the opposite of holy? It's godless. It's vulgar. It's profane. It's irreverent. If there are 4 words that describe our culture, I can't think of any better than these. Can you? I mean, ask these guys, these young guys. Do you know anybody that in your group that never uses a curse word? See? I'm 52. I've been around a little while. I'm going to tell you, I am shocked every time I go to Walmart. I'm in the parking lot, or I'm checking out, or I'm in the aisle, and I hear the F word. Yeah. That used to not be. I'm telling you guys that are young, that never happened. People didn't use profanity like that. Our world has become more and more and more vulgar and profane. And watch the TV programs. I know it's like the frog in the kettle. We watch TV and we get used to, well, you know, God doesn't lower His standards, but our world is drifting farther and farther away from. In fact, they put down the holy. Holier than thou. What, you think you're holier than thou? You know? Oh, you're Mr. Goody Two Shoes? You know? They want it to be common. They want to bring down, and I'm afraid that mentality, that urge, that trend in our culture has affected our churches. And it's definitely, listen to me, it's definitely affected our young people. Definitely. There's not much of a hair of difference between Christian young people and secular young people when it comes to what they're listening to, how they're talking. There's no other. There's no distinction, right? And if there's no distinction, if we're living in a vulgar, common way, how are we ever going to hear the voice of holy God like Isaiah did? We have to be brought into that experience of encountering the holy. And the only place that people have any chance of having that happen really is in the context of the people of God, church. I'm not saying God can't show up in a dorm room, because He certainly did for me. But I'm saying all we can do is set an atmosphere, and the atmosphere that I see people being called out of in Scripture is an atmosphere of God's presence. And so we need to seek God's presence. Too many Christians are asking, how far can I go without sinning? That's the question, is it not? Tell me, youth ministers, young people, that's the question. Hey, maybe adults. That's how far can I go without sinning?
As a youth minister, one of my favorite questions, I used to just have a question and answer time, and one of my favorite ones, well, one of the favorite ones for them was, okay, so can we hold hands?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hold hands. Well, can we hug each other? Okay, and then you already start to see what they're trying to do. They want to see how close they can get to being
to the edge.
Yeah, without sinning. And I'm going, well, the whole point is what? Being holy.
Yeah, the question is, how close can I get to God?
Yeah.
We've got to flip the script. How close can I get to God? James 4:8. Draw near to God and He'll draw near to you. Anybody know the next verse? Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Draw near to God and He'll draw near to you. This is a great promise. One of the best. So the biblical pattern is that the holy God reserves the exclusive right to set apart those who may handle His holy things. Think about that for a moment. He reserves that right. Holy in the New Testament, I was going to go through that, but we have a holy calling is where I was going to end with it. 2 Timothy 1:9 says this. Therefore, 1:8, therefore do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God, who saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of our works, but because of His own purpose and grace, which He gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. We have a holy calling. Let's not lose sight of that. You can handle the holy only after the holy's handled you. We need to get back to that. Pursue the holy and you will find that nothing else matters. Here's where I'm at on this, and I haven't developed it yet, but I want an appetite for the holy. An appetite. That's my word, appetite. I find that I have appetites for all kinds of things, and I try to repress those appetites. And I'm coming to realize that I don't need to repress those appetites. I need to replace those appetites. And then I won't have the appetite for that because I have an appetite for this. And if I have an appetite for the holy, I'll lose my appetite for the vulgar, the profane, the common, the empty.
Do you think that is the lesson God was trying to teach His people when He led them out of Egypt into the wilderness? They were forced to deal with themselves. They had to deal with their appetite for bread. appetite for meat, appetite for comfort, sameness, predictability, etc., that they had in Egypt. God put them in a place where the failures of those elements led to this desperate cry for God to intervene. And God proved himself faithful through all of that.
He did.
And I think God, when a person is saved, will allow that person he will open their eyes spiritually to see how Satan has been at work in their life, attacking and destroying, and will
Don't want that anymore.
a cry for God, for holiness, to be with God, near God. And it's a draw. It's like applying heat when you're soldering a piece of copper. You apply the heat when you touch the solder, it sucks it in. And you'll be sucked into the Lord when the heat's
I think that's a beautiful description.
But we don't want heat.
No.
We don't like
No,
that.
we don't like the forge.
No.
No. Chip Stevens spoke at the Mississippi Baptist Committee. I don't know if any of you were here. I was very impacted by what he said. He talked about Abraham wanting a child, wanting an heir, and how he went through all these problems. But what Abraham missed out on was that God said, Abraham, I am your very great reward. And Abraham had replaced God with these hopes and aspirations for his own life. But God wanted to be his great reward. I want an appetite for the holy. I do. Do I fail? Yes.
I wonder if we're heavily influenced by seeker movement and all this kind of stuff, and I think the common perception is that if we get very deep into what it means to be holy, we may be offensive to people who are not. And all the statistics, all the statisticians, all the big churches show us that we can only delve so far into this. So I just wonder, either one of two things has to happen. We've either got to model how this can work in a church, or we've got to become people that say, even if it doesn't produce, we're still going to live this or teach this. The other thing I think is Southern Baptists, we're used to everything being evangelistic, so we sometimes keep it very surface level. And I don't know that Sunday morning is supposed to be primarily an evangelistic.
This has tentacles that reach out everywhere. I realize that, and it's a challenge to me every day. But I don't think the answer to the world trying to. I don't think the answer to the harassment from the world is compromise. I think it's going deeper into holiness. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like Peter and John said, you may tell us not to preach, but we got to.
Yeah.
And that's the way we need to approach things.
Yeah. We also got to think that church is for God.
Yes.
Not for people. I mean, God's presence will draw. That's tough because I think we like the verse, I become all things to all people, right? More than we do anything related to this. But I think that we've used that in the wrong way, in a way it wasn't intended. Some people say, well, I have to become like the world in order to reach the world. I don't think that's what Paul's talking about. I don't think Paul's saying become satanic to reach Satanists. I don't think he's saying become worldly to reach. What you attract the world with is what you have to keep them with.
It's interesting.
You attract them with a circus, you have to.
It's interesting to me how Peter, writing to an audience that was going through such persecution and hardship, he called them strangers, but his challenge was be holy.
Yeah,
For the Lord your God is holy.
yeah, exactly.
And that was not going to earn them favor in their community.
Yeah. So I just want to wrap up. I'm sorry, I probably went way over time. Thank y'all for bearing with me. But recommended resources: Holiness of God by Sprout. I hate autocorrect. R.C. Sprout. Dangerous Calling by Paul David Tripp. If you've read that, I think you'll like that. He talks about losing our awe for God, and how as pastors we get caught up in the mundane things and we can kind of lose our awe. Calling Out the Called, which I mentioned earlier. I've been enjoying a couple of devotionals, Morning and Evening by Spurgeon, has been really hitting me on these issues. And then Drawing Near by John MacArthur has been good if you're looking for another devotional to use. They've been around a long time, but you know.